You'd think a man who owned a kingdom of grass and cattle, a ranch in Montana so vast you could ride for 2 days and never see another soul, would be the happiest man on earth. You'd be wrong. Marcus Thornfield stood on his porch, watching the sun bleed across a sky that was all his, and the only thing he felt was the crushing weight of silence. He had an empire, but he was a king with no one to talk to. So he did what any desperate, practical man in 1888 would do. He decided to buy a wife. He sent a letter to an agency in Chicago, a simple transaction for a simple problem. But the woman who was about to step off that stagecoach wasn't a simple solution. She wasn't just carrying a suitcase. She was carrying a secret that was going to burn his entire world to the ground. The letter that came back was cold and efficient. Her name was Elena Vasquez, 26 years old, a seamstress from San Antonio. Strong moral character, it said. Practical disposition. It read like a bill of lading for a piece of furniture, not a human being. Marcus told himself that's what he wanted. Practical, uncomplicated. He spent the next month trying to convince himself he hadn't made the biggest mistake of his life. He had the house cleaned. He bought new curtains. He felt like a fool, a rich fool playing house. His foreman, a grizzled old hand named Jim Patterson, cornered him by the corrals one morning. "Heard you're expecting company," he said, not looking at Marcus. "A woman." The words hung in the air, smelling of judgment and dust. Marcus just grunted. "Place like this needs a woman's touch," Patterson finally said, and the simple approval felt like a pardon from the governor. The day she was due to arrive, the air itself felt tense, stretched thin over the mountains. Marcus drove his best buggy into Cedar Falls, a town that was little more than a general store and a stage stop. He was an hour early. He paced. He checked his pocket watch a dozen times. He felt like a teenager on his first date. When the stagecoach finally rumbled into view, a cloud of dust and creaking leather, Marcus felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The driver, a man named Hawkins, gave him a knowing grin. "Got a special delivery for you, Thornfield." The door creaked open, and the woman who stepped out shattered every expectation he had. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back so tight it looked severe. Her traveling dress was worn but spotless. But it was her eyes. They were the color of a midnight storm, and they looked at him not with fear or hope, but with a flat, unnerving assessment. It was like she was the one buying a horse, and he was the one being inspected. "Mr. Thornfield," she said. Her voice was steady, with a faint accent that made his name sound foreign. She held out a gloved hand. Her handshake was firm, confident, too confident. On the ride back to the ranch, she didn't chatter. She didn't exclaim at the beauty of the mountains. She asked questions, practical, sharp questions, about water rights, about winter feed, about the mortality rate of his calves. It was like he was being interviewed for a job he already had. As they crested the final hill and the rocking tea ranch spread out below them, a testament to 20 years of his blood and sweat, she just nodded. No praise, no awe, just a quiet, unnerving stillness. At the house, he carried her 2 small worn bags to the guest room he'd prepared. "This will be satisfactory," she said, looking around the room as if she were inspecting a barracks. "I assume my duties will begin in the morning." There was no warmth, no softness, just a cold, hard wall of something. He couldn't put his finger on it. Later that night, unable to sleep, Marcus walked past her room. He saw a sliver of light under the door and heard a faint scratching sound. Curiosity got the better of him. He peered through the old keyhole. Elena was sitting at the small desk, not writing a letter home, not reading a book. She had a small, wicked-looking knife in her hand, and she was methodically, almost ritualistically, sharpening it on a whetstone. Over and over again, the soft, rhythmic scrape of steel on stone sent a chill down his spine. Who was this woman? And what in God's name had he just invited into his home? The next few days were a quiet battle of wills. Elena took over the household with a terrifying efficiency. The house had never been cleaner, the meals never better. But she moved like a ghost, a silent, watchful presence in his home. She never spoke unless spoken to, and her answers were always clipped, precise. She never smiled. He would catch her watching him sometimes, her dark eyes unreadable, and he felt like a stranger in his own house. The cowboys were spooked by her. They called her the Shadow. Patterson just shook his head. "She's got secrets, boss," he muttered one day. "The kind that leave scars." Oh. Marcus knew he was right, but every time he tried to ask her about her past, about her family, she would deflect with a cold, polite question about the ranch. The wall around her was made of ice and stone. He was beginning to think he had simply traded one kind of loneliness for another, a loud, empty loneliness for a quiet, terrifying one. Then came the storm. It blew in from the north without warning, a furious blizzard that buried the ranch in 3 feet of snow overnight. The temperature plummeted. It was a fight for survival. For the next 3 days, Marcus and his men worked around the clock, digging out cattle, trying to keep the newborns from freezing. It was brutal, exhausting work. On the third night, a young cowboy, barely 18, stumbled into the main house, his face pale, his breathing ragged. He'd taken a fall trying to rescue a calf, and a splintered fence post had gashed his leg wide open. It was a bad wound, deep and dirty. Patterson took one look and swore, "He's losing too much blood. We'll never get him to a doctor in this storm. He's not going to make it." The boy was shivering violently, his eyes glazed with fever. Marcus felt a cold knot of despair tighten in his gut. He was about to lose one of his men. Suddenly, Elena was there. She pushed past Marcus and Patterson without a word. "Bring him to the kitchen table," she commanded. "Boil water. Get me clean linen, whiskey, and the sewing kit from my room." Her voice was no longer quiet. It was steel, the voice of a general taking command of a battlefield. She worked with a speed and focus that was mesmerizing. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, ignoring the boy's cries. Her hands were steady, sure. As she prepared a needle and thread, Marcus saw a long, jagged scar on her forearm, pale and white against her olive skin. It wasn't the kind of scar a seamstress would have. It was the kind of scar a knife fighter would have. For the next hour, she stitched the boy's leg back together. Her stitches were small, neat, perfect. Far more practiced than any seamstress needed to be. When she was done, she wrapped the wound tightly and forced a mix of whiskey and some bitter-smelling herbs from a pouch she wore around her neck down the boy's throat. "He'll sleep now," she said, finally looking at Marcus, her eyes burning with an intensity he'd never seen before. "The fever should break by morning. If it doesn't, he's lost." She had saved the boy's life. Marcus was sure of it, but as he looked at her, standing there with blood on her apron, her face grim and set, he felt a new wave of fear wash over him. This wasn't a seamstress. He didn't know what she was. But the life she lived before coming here was 100 times harder and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The wall around her wasn't just to keep him out, it was to keep something else in. The boy's fever broke just as the storm did. He would live. The cowboys stopped calling Elena the Shadow and started looking at her with a mixture of awe and fear. She had earned their respect, but she had also deepened the mystery surrounding her. Marcus knew he couldn't keep living with a stranger. He had to know the truth. That evening, he found her on the porch, staring out at the newly white world. "You need to tell me who you are," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Not what the agency told me, the truth." She was silent for a long time, so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, laced with a pain that was raw and real. "The truth, Mr. Thornfield, is a luxury. I cannot afford it, and you cannot afford to hear it." Before he could press her, she turned and went inside, leaving him alone with the cold air and 1,000 unanswered questions. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, and he had no idea if the next step would be onto solid ground or into a bottomless abyss. A few weeks later, the spring thaw began, and with it came calving season, the most hopeful and dangerous time of year for a rancher. It also brought the first test of Elena's strange skills since the storm. One of his prize Hereford cows, Duchess, was in labor with a bull calf worth a small fortune. But the birth was going wrong. The calf was breached, tangled up, and Duchess was growing weaker by the hour. The vet, a crusty old man named Morrison, had been working on her for hours. Finally, he straightened up, wiping his hands on a bloody rag. "I'm sorry, Marcus. She's exhausted. The calf's stuck good. We're going to lose them both. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money. It was about the future of his herd. He was about to give the order to put the cow out of her misery when Elena appeared in the barn doorway. She took in the scene with one quick, assessing glance. "Move," she said to the vet. Morrison bristled. "Now see here, ma'am. I've been delivering calves for 30 years. And you're about to watch this one die." She cut him off, her voice like flint. "Move." There was something in her tone that made everyone in the barn, even the seasoned cowboys, take a step back. She knelt beside the struggling cow, not with gentle, soothing hands, but with an almost brutal efficiency. She spoke to the animal in a low, rapid stream of Spanish, her hands moving over the cow's swollen belly, probing, feeling. Then she did something that made the vet gasp. She took a deep breath, braced herself, and with a grunt of effort, she struck the cow hard on a specific point on her flank. The cow bellowed, a sound of shock and pain. "What in God's name are you doing, woman?" Morrison yelled. "You'll kill her." "I'm resetting the calf," Elena said through clenched teeth, her focus absolute. She struck the cow again, a precise, calculated blow. There was a sickening internal shifting sound. The cow shuddered, then let out a low groan. And then, impossibly, the calf's front hooves appeared. Within minutes, a healthy, squirming bull calf was lying in the straw. Duchess, exhausted but alive, immediately began licking her newborn clean. The barn was silent, except for the soft sounds of the new mother and her baby. Dr. Morrison stared at Elena, his mouth hanging open. I've never seen anything like that. That's not in any book I've ever read. Where did you learn to do that?" Elna stood, brushing straw from her skirt. She looked from the vet to Marcus, her face a mask. "I learned it in a place where if your only goat died, your family didn't eat for a month. Necessity teaches you things books never will." She walked out of the barn without another word. The cowboys stared after her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and reverence. Marcus watched her go, a cold dread mixing with his relief. Every time she revealed a piece of her past, it was darker and more desperate than the last. He had saved his most valuable calf, but the price was a terrifying new question. What kind of hell had this woman crawled out of to get here? Life on the ranch settled into a new, tense rhythm. Elena was no longer just the silent housekeeper. She was a presence, a force. She began to offer suggestions about the ranch operations. Small things at first: a new way to rotate pastures to improve the grass, a change in the winter feed mixture to save money. Every suggestion was smart, practical, and effective. Marcus found himself relying on her judgment, discussing problems with her that he used to only discuss with Patterson. He was beginning to see her not just as a competent woman, but as a brilliant one. He was also beginning to feel something for her that went beyond respect. A dangerous, unwelcome flicker of attraction. He would watch her as she worked in the small vegetable garden she had planted behind the house, her hands in the dirt, her face finally losing some of its tension. And he would feel a pull, a longing that he hadn't felt in years. He was falling for his mail-order bride, the woman who was still a complete mystery to him. He knew it was a fool's errand. And then the second stranger arrived. He rode in on a tired horse one dusty afternoon, a young man, barely 20, with the same dark, stormy eyes as Elena. He was thin and ragged, with a desperate, hunted look about him. He slid off his horse and practically collapsed at the foot of the porch steps. Elena came out of the house, and when she saw him, her face went white. The mask of cold control she wore every day shattered into a million pieces. "Miguel," she breathed. The young man looked up, and his face was a storm of relief, anger, and fear. "Elena," he said in Spanish, his voice cracking. "I had nowhere else to go. He found me." Before she could answer, he fainted dead away on the ground. Elena rushed to his side, cradling his head in her lap, whispering his name over and over. Marcus and Patterson helped carry the boy inside. As they laid him on the parlor sofa, a piece of paper fell out of his coat pocket. Marcus picked it up. It was a wanted poster. It offered a $100 reward for a man named Miguel Vasquez, wanted for armed robbery and assault in Laredo, Texas. The face on the poster was the same face as the young man lying unconscious in his parlor. His wife's brother was a wanted criminal, and the he who had found him was almost certainly a lawman or a bounty hunter. The abyss he'd been standing at the edge of had just opened up right under his feet. When Miguel woke up, the story came tumbling out, a frantic, tangled mess of Spanish and broken English. He swore he was innocent. He hadn't robbed anyone. He'd been framed. Elena translated, her voice tight with strain, her eyes pleading with Marcus to believe him. She said the man who had framed him was named Roberto, a business partner who had cheated them, stolen everything they had, and then vanished, leaving Miguel to take the fall for his crimes. It was a wild story, a convenient story, and as much as Marcus wanted to believe it, the wanted poster in his pocket felt cold and heavy. He was a liar, Elena whispered, her hands clenched in her lap. A charmer. He could make you believe the sky was green. He promised us everything. The way she said it, the raw pain in her voice, told Marcus this Roberto was more than just a business partner. And now a bounty hunter is after Miguel, she finished, her eyes locking with his. He was in the last town asking questions. That's why Miguel ran. He came here. The implication was clear. She had brought this trouble to his doorstep. Her past wasn't just a memory. It was a living, breathing threat that was now on its way to his ranch. He had a choice to make. He could turn Miguel in, hand him over to the law, and wash his hands of this mess. It would be the smart, safe thing to do. Or he could trust Elena, trust this woman of secrets and scars, and risk everything he had built to protect her and her fugitive brother. He looked at Elena, at the desperation warring with pride in her eyes. He looked at the boy on his sofa, who looked less like a hardened criminal and more like a terrified kid. He had bought a wife to cure his loneliness, to bring peace to his life. Instead, she had brought chaos and danger. But he also realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity that the thought of sending her away, of going back to the silence, was now unbearable. He can stay, Marcus said, the words feeling like a death sentence and a declaration of love all at once. He can work. We'll hide him with the hands. But if this bounty hunter shows up, I can't promise what will happen. The relief on Elena's face was so profound, it was like watching the sun break through a storm. For the first time since she had arrived, she looked at him with something other than suspicion or assessment. It was a fragile, hesitant flicker of gratitude. And for Marcus, it was enough. For now. Miguel was a hard worker. He was quiet, eager to please, and surprisingly good with horses. He blended in with the other cowboys, and for a few weeks, a fragile peace settled over the ranch. Marcus almost allowed himself to believe the danger had passed. He was a fool. The bounty hunter arrived in Cedar Falls like a harbinger of death. He was a tall, lean man, with dead eyes and a long duster that couldn't quite hide the two peacemakers strapped to his hips. He didn't ask questions so much as make statements, his voice soft and menacing. He let it be known he was looking for Miguel Vasquez, and he was willing to pay for information. Word travels fast in a small town. Patterson rode back to the ranch that evening, his face grim. He's here, boss. A man named Cutler. He's sniffing around, asking about any new hands you've hired. It's only a matter of time before he rides out here. The fragile peace shattered. That night, the ranch felt like a fortress under siege. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching horse. Elena was a wreck, her composure gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. Marcus found her in the barn checking on Miguel, who was sleeping in a hidden loft. "We have to send him away," she whispered, her voice trembling, "before that man finds him." "And send him where?" Marcus countered. "Out into the wilderness with a killer on his trail? He wouldn't last a week. He's safer here, with us." "No one is safe with that man nearby," she said. And the way she said it, the absolute certainty in her voice, told him she knew more about this Cutler than she was letting on. The fear in her eyes wasn't just for Miguel. It was for herself. "You know him, don't you?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "This bounty hunter." Elena flinched, turning away from him. "His name is not Cutler. It's Cole. He doesn't work for the law. He works for Roberto." The name hit the air like a snake striking. Roberto, the ghost from her past, the man who had framed her brother. Roberto hired a bounty hunter to find Miguel? Marcus asked, confused. Why? What does he want with him? He doesn't want Miguel, Elena said, finally turning back to face him, her eyes filled with a terrible, dawning horror. He wants me. He sent Miguel here as bait. He knew I would run to you, to a man with land and money. He followed Miguel, and now he knows where I am. Cole isn't here to capture Miguel. He's here to deliver a message. The blood ran cold in Marcus's veins. This was never about a simple robbery. This was something far more personal, far more twisted. He had been a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. His ranch wasn't a refuge. It was the final square on a chessboard. What message? He demanded. Just then, the barn door creaked open. Both of them froze. A figure was silhouetted against the moonlight. It was Patterson. Boss, he whispered, his voice urgent. There's a fire. The north pasture. It's burning. It wasn't a message. It was a declaration of war. The fire was a raging inferno, a wall of orange devouring the dry summer grass, driven by a hot, relentless wind. It was moving straight for his main herd of cattle, and it hadn't started by accident. Marcus could see the telltale signs of multiple ignition points. It was arson. It was coal. It was Roberto's way of saying, I am here, and I can destroy you. For the next 12 hours, it was hell on earth. Marcus, Patterson, Miguel, and every hand on the ranch fought the blaze. The air was thick with smoke, burning their lungs, stinging their eyes. The roar of the flames was deafening. Men shouted, horses screamed, and cattle bellowed in terror. It was a desperate, losing battle. Through it all, Elena was a whirlwind of motion. She organized a bucket brigade from the creek. She tore strips from her own dresses to make masks against the smoke. She tended to the men's burns with the same focused intensity she had shown with the injured cowboy. She was no longer afraid. She was furious. She was a warrior defending her home. By dawn, they had managed to beat the fire back, creating a firebreak that saved the main herd. But the cost was staggering. Hundreds of acres of his best pasture were gone, turned to black, smoking ash. Dozens of cattle were dead or had to be put down. The rocking T was wounded, bleeding. As the sun rose on the scorched landscape, Marcus saw a lone rider on the ridge overlooking the valley. He was too far away to see clearly, but Marcus knew who it was. Cole, the bounty hunter. He sat on his horse for a long moment, a black silhouette against the smoky orange sky, then turned and rode away. The message had been delivered. Exhausted, smoke-stained, and heartbroken, Marcus and his crew staggered back to the ranch house. The fight had taken everything out of them. But as Marcus looked at Elena, her face smudged with soot, her dress torn, her eyes blazing with defiance, he didn't see a victim. He saw a queen, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would go to hell and back for her. He had to know everything. Tell me, he said, his voice raw from the smoke. Tell me all of it. Who is this Roberto, and what does he want from you? And so, in the quiet of the ranch house, surrounded by the smell of smoke and exhaustion, Elena finally told him the whole story. Roberto wasn't just a business partner. He had been her fiancé. He was handsome, charming, and utterly ruthless. Their family had owned a successful leatherworking business in San Antonio. Roberto had wooed Elena, convinced her father to make him a full partner, and then systematically bled the company dry. He took out secret loans, sold off stock, and cooked the books. He didn't just steal our money, Elena said, her voice a dead, flat monotone. He stole our name, our future. He left us with nothing but debts to very dangerous men. When her father discovered the betrayal, he confronted Roberto. There was a fight. Her father had a weak heart. He collapsed and died right there in the shop. Roberto vanished that night. To cover his tracks, he framed Miguel, the hot-headed younger brother who had always distrusted him, for an armed robbery he himself had committed. But that wasn't enough for him, Elena continued, her eyes dark with memory. The most valuable thing we owned wasn't the business. It was a series of old Spanish land grants, passed down through my mother's family. They were for vast tracts of land in Montana. Marcus stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. He thinks the grants are for this land, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He thinks my ranch is legally yours. He doesn't think it, Elena said. He's gambling on it. The grants are old. Their boundaries are vague. He thinks he can use them and me to take this place from you. He sent Cole to burn your pasture, not just to scare you, but to hurt you financially, to make you weak, to make you more willing to give in when he makes his move. Why wouldn't he just come himself? Marcus asked. Why the games? Because he's a coward, she spat, the first real venom he'd ever heard from her. And because he enjoys the cruelty. He wants to terrorize me first. He wants me to know that he can reach me anywhere, that I'll never be safe from him. He thinks that when he finally shows up, I'll be so broken that I'll do whatever he says. A cold, hard rage began to build in Marcus's chest, a rage unlike any he had ever felt. This wasn't about land or money anymore. This was about the woman who had, against all odds, captured his heart. He's wrong, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. This is my home. You are under my protection. If he wants a war, he'll get one. Elena looked at him, and for the second time, he saw something new in her eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a flicker of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a man who wouldn't betray her. The next move came sooner than they expected. A lawyer from Denver arrived in a fancy carriage, armed with a briefcase full of documents. He represented a client who was laying claim to a significant portion of the Rocking Tea Ranch, based on historical Spanish land grants held in the name of the Vasquez family. The lawyer was smug, confident. He presented Marcus with a choice: sell the ranch to his client for a fraction of its value, or face a lengthy, ruinously expensive legal battle they were certain to win. It was Roberto's checkmate, or so he thought. Tell your client, Marcus said, his voice calm and steady as he stood beside Elena in his study, that my answer is no. This ranch is not for sale. The lawyer smirked. You're a fool, Thornfield. You'll be bankrupt within a year. After he left, the reality of their situation sank in. The grants were real. Elena's name was on them. Roberto, claiming to be her fiancé and legal representative, had a plausible, if fraudulent, case. They were in a fight for their lives. For the next few months, their world became a nightmare of legal papers, telegrams to lawyers in Helena, and dwindling bank accounts. The cost of the legal fight was bleeding Marcus dry. He had to sell off a small herd of cattle at a loss just to pay the first round of legal fees. The strain was immense. The men were on edge. The specter of losing everything hung over the ranch like a shroud. Through it all, Elena was his rock. The crisis seemed to have burned away her fear, leaving behind pure, unadulterated steel. She worked alongside him, poring over maps and legal documents late into the night. Her mind was sharp, her insights invaluable. She saw things his own lawyers missed, connections between old survey maps and water rights that strengthened their case. They were no longer a boss and a housekeeper, or a lonely rancher and his mysterious mail-order bride. They were partners, a team, and in the crucible of that fight, something beautiful and unexpected began to grow. The quiet attraction Marcus had felt for her deepened into a profound respect, an undeniable love. He found himself thinking not about the ranch he might lose, but about the woman he couldn't bear to lose. One night, sitting exhausted in his study, surrounded by a mountain of paperwork, he looked at her. Her face was tired, but her eyes were still bright with intelligence and fight. Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion, this started as a business arrangement. I know that, but it's not that anymore. Not for me. She looked up from the map she was studying, her expression guarded. When this is over, he continued, his heart pounding in his chest, win or lose, I'm asking you to marry me, a real marriage, as my wife, my partner, in everything. Her composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Marcus, she whispered, you don't know what you're asking. Roberto, he destroyed my ability to trust. I don't know if I can ever. Then we'll learn together, he said, moving to her side, gently taking her hand. I'm not him. I will never betray you. Before she could answer, the door to the study burst open. It was Miguel, his face ashen. He's here, he said, his voice trembling. Roberto. He just rode up to the house, and Cole is with him. The final battle had begun. Roberto was exactly as Elena had described him. He was handsome, dressed in an expensive suit, and his smile was as charming as it was predatory. He stood on Marcus's porch as if he owned it, with the silent, deadly Cole standing a few feet behind him, like a shadow of death. Elena, my love, Roberto said, his voice smooth as silk. You look well. Frontier life agrees with you. What do you want, Roberto? Elena said, her voice shaking with rage. Marcus stood beside her, his hand resting on the butt of the pistol tucked into his waistband. What I've always wanted, Roberto said, his eyes flicking from Elena to Marcus and back again. What is rightfully mine? This land. And you. He smiled that venomous smile again. You see, Marcus, you've made a critical error. You think this is a legal fight, but it's not. It's a personal one. I have a new document, a marriage license, signed and dated 2 years ago in San Antonio, making Elena my legal wife, which means everything she owns, including her claim to this land, belongs to me. It was a lie, a brazen, outrageous lie. But a marriage license, even a forged one, would be a legal nightmare. It would tie them up in court for years, long enough to bankrupt Marcus completely. It was a brilliant, evil move. You're insane, Elena breathed. It's a forgery. Is it? Roberto purred. Prove it. By the time you do, this ranch will be nothing but a memory. But I'm a reasonable man. I'll make you a deal. He looked directly at Elena, his eyes cold and possessive. Leave him. Come with me. Sign the documents transferring the grants to me, and I'll let him keep a small piece of this place. I'll even call off Cole. Otherwise, he'll lose everything. And men who lose everything sometimes have accidents. The threat was unmistakable. He was giving Elena a choice: sacrifice herself or watch the man she was beginning to love be destroyed. Marcus felt a surge of pure, murderous rage. He was about to draw his pistol to end this right here and now. Consequences be damned. But Elena put a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw not fear, but a plan. A desperate, dangerous plan. All right, Elena said, her voice surprisingly calm. I'll do it. Marcus stared at her, his heart stopping. Miguel gasped. Roberto's smile widened in triumph. A wise choice, my love. But not here, Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. I want to do this in town, in front of a judge. I want it to be legal and binding, so you can never bother us again. We will meet you at the judge's office in Cedar Falls tomorrow at noon. Roberto's eyes narrowed, suspicious. Why? Because I want witnesses, she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that sounded completely real. I want everyone to see that I am choosing to do this to save this ranch. I will not have you spreading lies that I ran back to you. It was a brilliant play on his ego. Roberto, ever the showman, loved the idea. A public humiliation for Marcus, a public victory for himself. He agreed. Tomorrow at noon, he said. Don't be late. He and Cole mounted their horses and rode away. As soon as they were gone, Marcus turned to Elena, his mind reeling. What have you done? You can't go with him. I'm not going to, she said, and for the first time he saw her smile. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. He thinks he's setting a trap, but he's the one who is about to walk into it. Their plan was desperate, relying on a long shot and a piece of information Elena had been holding back, her final, most painful secret. That night, Marcus and Patterson rode like the wind. They didn't ride towards Cedar Falls. They rode south. Their destination was the telegraph office in the next county, a 2-hour ride away. Marcus sent 2 telegrams, one to his lawyer in Helena, with a series of frantic coded instructions. The other was to the Texas Rangers in Laredo. He told them where to find Miguel Vasquez, the man wanted for robbery, and he told them where to find the man who had really committed the crime. He was sacrificing Miguel, hoping, praying, that the second part of his message would be heard. It was a terrible gamble. If it failed, Miguel would hang. They rode back to the ranch under the cover of darkness, their fate now in the hands of a telegraph wire in the hope of justice. The next morning, as Elena prepared to go into town, she finally told Marcus the last piece of the puzzle. Roberto didn't just forge a marriage license, she said, her voice low. He forged my signature on the loan documents that ruined my family. All of them. But he made a mistake. One of the loans was from a man my father knew, a man who knew that I am left-handed. The signature on that loan document is from a right-handed person. It's the one piece of evidence that can prove he's a forger and a fraud. Why didn't you say this before? Marcus asked, his mind racing. Because to use it would be to admit I knew about the loans, she confessed, shamefaced. I discovered his thefts weeks before he fled. I confronted him. I agreed to keep silent if he would pay the money back. I was a fool. I was trying to protect my father from the heartbreak. Instead, my silence led to his death. This was her deepest shame, the secret she had carried all this way. She had trusted the wrong man, and her family had paid the price. It was the reason she had built such a high wall around her heart. At noon, the judge's office in Cedar Falls was packed. Roberto, arrogant and triumphant, had spread the word. He wanted an audience for his victory. Marcus, Elena, and Miguel stood on one side of the room. Roberto and Cole stood on the other. The judge, a stern-faced man named Peters, looked over the documents Roberto had provided, the forged marriage license, the land grant claims. This seems to be a straightforward matter, the judge said, looking at Elena with a mixture of pity and contempt. Mrs. Mendez, are you agreeing to sign these transfer documents of your own free will? The name felt like a slap. Before Elena could answer, the door to the office flew open. A man stood there, tall and imposing, wearing the unmistakable badge of a U.S. Marshal. Apologies for the interruption, Judge, the Marshal said, his eyes scanning the room. I have a warrant. Roberto paled. A warrant for who? For you, Mr. Mendez. Or should I say, Mr. Roberto Diaz, the Marshal said, his voice booming. I have a telegram here from a Pinkerton detective, hired by Mr. Thornfield. He's been tracking you for months. Seems you have a habit of using forged documents to swindle families out of their businesses. There's a string of them from San Antonio to Santa Fe. Roberto was stunned, speechless. The Pinkerton. It was Marcus's ace in the hole. The lawyer in Helena wasn't just a lawyer. He was a contact. He had hired a detective weeks ago, after Miguel first arrived, to hunt for the truth about Roberto. But the Marshal wasn't finished. I also have a warrant for your associate, Mr. Cole, he said, turning his gaze on the bounty hunter, for arson, attempted murder, and cattle rustling. Cole's hand went for his gun, but he never had a chance. Patterson and three of Marcus's biggest cowboys, who had been waiting outside, burst into the room. Before Cole could even clear leather, he was on the floor, disarmed and in cuffs. Roberto, seeing it was over, made a desperate move. He grabbed Elena, pulling her in front of him, and drew a small derringer from his coat pocket, pressing it to her head. Nobody moves, he screamed, his charming facade gone, revealing the cornered rat beneath. Let me walk out of here or she dies. But he had underestimated Elena. He had underestimated the woman who had survived him once and was not about to let him win now. With a speed that shocked everyone, she drove her elbow back into his stomach, hard. As he gasped for air, she stomped on his instep with the heel of her boot and twisted out of his grasp. In that split second of freedom, Marcus acted. He launched himself across the room, not at Roberto, but at Elena, tackling her and pulling her to the floor, covering her with his own body. At the same moment, another figure moved, Miguel. The terrified boy was gone. In his place was a man defending his sister. He picked up a heavy wooden chair and brought it crashing down on Roberto's arm. The derringer clattered to the floor. The fight was over. As the Marshal dragged a screaming, defeated Roberto away, another lawman entered the room. A Texas Ranger. He walked over to Miguel. Miguel Vasquez? He asked. Miguel nodded, his face pale, ready to be arrested. The charges against you in Laredo have been dropped, the Ranger said. A sworn statement from your sister, along with evidence provided by Mr. Thornfield's detective, has cleared your name. The man responsible is already in federal custody. You're a free man. Miguel stared at him, then at Marcus, then at his sister. The weight of years of fear and running lifted from his shoulders. He was free, truly free. In the aftermath, as the crowd dispersed and the dust settled, Marcus and Elena stood alone in the center of the room. He looked at the woman before him, the woman he had bought for companionship, the woman who had saved his ranch, his men, and in the end had helped save herself. The love he felt for her was so immense, so powerful, it almost brought him to his knees. He took her hand. "The offer still stands," he said quietly. "Marry me, Elena Vasquez. Be my partner. Be my wife." She looked up at him, her dark, stormy eyes cleared of all secrets, all fear. And for the second time in her life, she smiled. This time it wasn't terrifying. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Marcus Thornfield, I will." They were married a week later, under the big cottonwood trees by the creek. The entire ranch was there. Patterson was Marcus's best man. Miguel, his head held high, walked his sister down the makeshift aisle. When the Reverend asked Marcus for the ring, he presented Elena not with a simple gold band, but with a new deed. The deed to the Rocking Tea Ranch. It was in both their names. Marcus Thornfield and Elena Thornfield, equal partners. Their wedding night, there were no more secrets, no more walls. They were two survivors, two scarred warriors who had found in each other not just love, but a safe harbor. They had discovered that the strongest bonds aren't forged in peace and quiet, but in the fires of adversity. Their life together was not the simple, uncomplicated existence Marcus had once craved. It was better. It was real. The Rocking Tea flourished under their joint leadership. Elena's sharp mind and Marcus's deep knowledge of the land were an unbeatable combination. They experimented with crop rotation, introduced new bloodlines to the herd, and built the ranch into the most successful and respected operation in the territory. Miguel stayed on for another year before taking a foreman position at a ranch in Wyoming, where he eventually married and started his own family. He had found his own peace. A few years later, the sound of a baby's cry finally filled the big, silent ranch house. A daughter with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Isabella. The lonely cattle baron was no longer lonely. He was a husband, a father, a partner. He had sent a letter looking for a housekeeper and had found a queen. He had sought a cure for his silence and had found the love of his life. His kingdom of grass and cattle was no longer empty. It was a home. If you believe Marcus and Elena fought for and earned every bit of their happiness, do us a favor and hit that like button. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because we've got stories coming up that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching.